Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is a conversation with Steve Flink. As you have come to expect after every single major, this time it's the 2023 US Open and Novak Djokovic's 24th major title, which he wins against Daniil Medvedev. We talk about that final. We talk about the Djokovic-Medvedev rivalry as a whole. We discuss Djokovic's net play and if we're going to see more and more of that over the next couple of years. We discuss Carlos Alcaraz. What do we make of his summer in which he did not win a title in any of the three tournaments he played? His loss to Daniil Medvedev, of course. The year-end number one race. Will it be Djokovic? Will it be Carlitos? And then we get into Ben Shelton at the end, who was, of course, the surprise semifinalist, unseeded. And that is it. You know, we went a long time on those topics. So, you know, I was thinking about maybe introducing some other stuff, but we just ran out of time because we got so engaged in speaking and talking about the semifinalists. So I will say before the interview, in the mailbag tomorrow, I am going to try my best to diversify and get some other topics in about some other players who did not go as deep as the semifinals because my coverage has been so focused on the tail end of the tournament thus far. So the community tab is where to leave a comment. I have already posted for tomorrow's mailbag, so check that out if you would like to leave a comment in the mailbag, and stay tuned for it tomorrow. But for now, without further ado, here is Steve Flink. We're joined once again by Hall of Fame tennis writer and journalist Steve Flink for our traditional post-major chat. 4 of 4, last one of the 2023 season. Steve, this is always a pleasure. Thanks again for coming on. I want to start with a technical question about the final, Djokovic-Medvedev. You've analyzed a lot more serve and volley tennis in your lifetime than me. In fact, normally I'm looking at a tennis match and I'm not seeing that much serve and volley from the time I've been covering the sport. But in this final, it was really significant. So I just want to ask off the bat, what did you see in this match on the Djokovic serve and volley that ended up winning him? Steve, I don't know if you've seen the stat, 20 of 22 points.
Yeah, no, I have. Well, what I frankly, I anticipated it. Because I watched Carlos try to do it against Medvedev quite a bit as well. He didn't do it nearly as skillfully as Novak because Carlos, I don't think, was swinging it wide enough. You know, Novak relies on a pretty heavy slice there. He's going anywhere. Some of them were 99, 103, 106. He's not trying to get that much speed, but he's got a very good wide slice that stays low and takes him off the court. And he used it, Gil, very effectively in the Bercy event 2 years ago when he avenged his US Open loss to Medvedev. He decided to use that tactic quite a bit with almost identical numbers in that final. And it was very, very effective. And yeah, he can do it on the ad court some too, but it's obviously particularly effective in the deuce court. And I think he'd made up his mind. And you heard later Medvedev lamenting in the press conference, I should have not be so stubborn. Well, that frankly, that amused me because Daniil is stubborn. All great players are stubborn, but he's had plenty of time against plenty of opponents. Nick Kyrgios beat him twice last summer, did quite a bit of attacking too and exposing him in that deuce court. And Daniil didn't do much about that either. And I just think he's way too comfortable standing so far back. So I thought it was a really smart tactic. And I was anticipating that Novak would do that. And I think he executed it really well. And obviously, we get to the tie break later that, of course, really swung the match permanently in his favor. It was the critical second set, but a couple of big points there where Novak used it in the tie break as well. So yeah. I admired the fact that he didn't back off on big points and say, no, I'm not going to do that now. He came forward. He was really not afraid to do so the whole match. But I thought it was one of the keys. I'm glad you brought it up. It was one of the keys to the victory was his ability to execute that and implement it. And often on very big points.
Yeah, so many great points in there. Novak's slice serve out wide, I think, is his best serve out of any serve that he hits. It is impressive that he, no matter the situation, didn't shy away from it. He understood that was the best play. You have to credit him for that. And you're right about Medvedev having years, to identify that players who are able to serve and volley are going to use it against him, particularly on the deuce side. And that adjustment, for the most part, hasn't come. And I do think I understand his perspective of, look, I am one of the best in the world at breaking serve. So obviously my return position works to a very large extent. At the same time, you need to understand Alcaraz is going to do this to you. Novak is going to do this to you. Kyrgios is going to do this to you. Even Tsitsipas started doing it. So it doesn't matter if you can get away with it against 99.5% of the tour. You still have to work to kind of find that return position variety or that response to the serve and volley, because these top two guys who you're going to play at the end of majors are going to use it. So, I mean, it's fair to criticize Medvedev for the return position, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But I just wondered, Gil, how comfortable he would be. It's fascinating to me to think of, suppose he did do it, suppose he changed it. How well would he return? He's just so set in his ways. And as you said, he's got that comfort level from waiver. He believes it can work against anybody. He believes in his return, believes that he'll be able to get from that deep position up on the baseline with a couple of deep shots and then take control of the rally. And obviously, that was not the case in this match. And as I say, it was really reminiscent to me of the Djokovic strategy in that Paris indoor match in the fall of 2021. So similar and just as well executed that day too. And the other thing is that Novak, when he does have to, those times when he got a lot of easy volleys, but when he had to dig something out, and the low volleys and the half volleys, including one on a break point there at 3-4 in the second set, phenomenal half volley drop. And he's just so much more skilled up at the net. He's gotten better and better, and it's served him well late in his career, as when he doesn't want to have to rely as often on baseline wars, particularly against a player like Daniil, who at times, and especially in the second set, can be such a brick wall from the baseline. Novak has to find other ways to disrupt him, and this was really one of the keys.
100%. Going back to the first thing you said about Medvedev's comfort level standing in, he did do it in the semifinal against Alcaraz in the third set. He didn't make any returns. He would stand up on the baseline. Alcaraz just hit body serves, and Daniil looked absolutely flustered at the idea of returning a body serve from on top of the baseline. I think he needs to look into finding a middle ground where he's not necessarily taking the return early. I think his average first serve return position is about 17, 18 feet behind the baseline. Maybe try 12 feet and see what happens with the kind of almost middling return position. So that might be an interesting thing for him to try. Steve, you mentioned the break point at 3-4. That was a big one, but let's talk about the set point where Novak served and volleyed on the ad side and hits this backhand volley that wasn't quite good enough. Medvedev had a good look at the pass, but then Novak covered the next shot extremely well. If Medvedev had gone down the line, it would have been a clean passing shot. But how did you see that point?
Yeah, no, that's it. That's the stuff for barroom conversations. I have a good friend, a fellow named Mike Hart, who's a great tennis observer. You would like him. And he was convinced, as McEnroe was, that it was there for the taking. I'm not as convinced, because I think the volley was hit fairly low. It wasn't, as you said, it wasn't quite good enough because it didn't have quite enough angle to get it out of Daniel's reach. But he had pushed him. If you look, I looked at the point again on tape, and he did pull him out of the alley. I mean, it was angled enough to make it a little difficult for Daniel. If he goes up the line, it's the higher part of the net, for one thing. And secondly, what if Novak makes that quick move across and cuts it off? We'll never know. It looked like he probably would have been beaten by it. But I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not as critical as McEnroe and my friend Mike about Daniel choosing the cross court. I think it was a quick decision to be made. Maybe he was a bit surprised because, as you said, this was an ad court point. This is an ad out. This is set point, in the ad court, and Novak has gone down the tee with the serve. Daniel's made a decent forehand return, and then Novak makes the backhand first volley angle. But I think Novak deserves credit for anticipating staying home and being right there for the backhand volley, which was not the easiest of all time, but certainly he wasn't going to miss it, and he punched it into the open court. So yeah, critical point, no doubt about it. But I felt like, okay, it required some quick thinking from Medvedev if he was going to go down the line, and maybe he just didn't trust it as much. And we all know the down the line is certainly not the easier of the two passing shots to execute, and the danger is the higher part of the net, you hit it into the net tape.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I wasn't as critical of Medvedev either. Not so much that I think if he went down the line, Novak would have covered it, but more so because he would have had no way of knowing that Novak wasn't going to move over and cover the line before the shot. So I think in Medvedev's head, he was going to go behind Djokovic, and then suddenly, Novak didn't move, so there was nowhere behind. There's no space to hit into. So I'm with you.
It's absolutely right. It's a guessing game. So it's spur of the moment. It's split second. But yes, he's quickly thinking probably Novak's going to cut. He's going to the line. He's going to cover the line. So it was a battle of wits, and Novak won that one. But I don't think it was I don't consider it a cardinal criminal error of judgment on Daniil's part, and I guess you don't either.
Yeah, totally agreed. Do you think we'll see more net rushing in the next couple of years for Djokovic? Is this a very matchup specific thing, or do you think he's going to implement this more and more? Because what stood out to me, Steve, I mean, as you know, one can decide to come forward, but then the volley skill on display for Djokovic, the consistency at which he executed the volleys was so impressive.
It was, because there was some really good, excellent, I should say, low forehand volleys that he made, low backhand volleys, half volley drop on the big point at 3-4 break point. I mean, and he does this now too often for anybody to say that he's just having a good day or he was lucky. No, he's very skilled now. That was one of his best volleying displays on a major occasion, maybe the best that I've ever seen from him. And to get to your point, I think he should think about it against other players. We see now that sometimes the stamina he can have a little difficulty. He admitted that his legs and lungs, he was feeling it. Now, Daniil brings that out of him more than anybody. There's no doubt that physically, to me, that's the toughest matchup for him. Even tougher physically than Carlos, because Carlos will go for it from time to time, not from time to time, quite frequently. Mm-hmm. Carlos is going to take a crack at something. They're going to be short points because he's going for a quick winner, and that's not Daniil's game. So part of it is Medvedev, but part of it is it's harder at 36, and it will be at 37 and 38 as well, to be the king of stamina the way he once was. So what could be a better formula than coming forward, particularly when you now have the skills? Now, that the only thing these guys could do if he came in a lot more is they might start throwing up those lobs. We know that Novak is the one area that he doesn't totally trust himself is the smash, but I've also seen him make a lot of good overheads as well. So, he could get tense on a big point. He missed one against Shelton when he lost his serve when he was serving for the match. Okay, it can happen. But, I mean, how many times are they going to thwart him with that? He's going to win so many more points he's going to lose by making good volleys than he is by losing points with errant smashes.
Yep.
Do you agree?
I do. I think it's kind of a continuation of his evolution, and he can do it more. I think the work has already put in for him to improve his volleys, and he's been doing that, I think, over the course of many, many, many years. I don't think he's yet made the decision to really lean on it heavily, but I think next year, the year after, I think we might start to see more matches where Novak does decide that he's gonna come in at every opportunity like he did in this match. So,
yeah, and of course, sometimes he doesn't have to. Obviously, does he really need to against Fritz? No. He came in at the right times against Shelton, including that 5-4 point in the tiebreak, which was a very big one, where he made a little forehand drop volley and followed with that nice feel on the backhand volley that won him the point. But I don't think he felt like he could do that mainly from the baseline. Plus, somebody as streaky off the ground as Shelton, you're not as worried about the continuous long points. So I think it's a question of opponent by opponent. But there's no doubt that some of these guys, he would benefit against some of these guys by adding that element, and he should feel a lot of conviction about being able to pull it off.
Yeah. Wrapping up Djokovic-Medvedev and the final, I want to look at their head-to-head big picture, because it's probably been the most important hardcourt rivalry in tennis since 2019. And Medvedev has certainly had a bounce back year in comparison to his 2022, where at times he's looked very, very formidable. At times he's looked like the second best hardcourt player in the world. And certainly this US Open was a demonstration of that. That said, I look at the way Novak has started to play him on hard courts, really going back to the Australian Open final in 2021. And I don't see a match where Medvedev has beaten Novak at full power. Does Djokovic have Daniil's number at this point, you think? Because there was a stretch where Medvedev won 3 out of 4 matches against Djokovic and was looking like a bad matchup for Novak. But how do you see this head-to-head now?
Yeah, you're going back to 19, right? Yeah, no, you've analyzed it well. I do think, though, that it's hard. He knows he's going to have to put in the maximum physical effort. I mean, the match that I always turn to and that I thought a lot about heading into this one was the year-end championships last year. And Djokovic had won their previous clash when Medvedev got hurt and it split sets. And he retired, and that was some really high level stuff. So they go to Turin, and Djokovic is qualified for the semifinals already. As most of our listeners know, that's a round robin event. He's won his first 2 matches. He's beaten Rublev and Tsitsipas, so he's in because he's won 2 straight setters. So he goes out against Daniil. Daniil had a tough week, losing 3 matches in the third set tiebreakers. But this turns into one of the Djokovic-Medvedev wars. Djokovic won the first set and had chances in the second, might have been able to win it straight if he converted some opportunities, but Daniil wins the set, and then they go in the third set, and you can tell that Novak was feeling it physically then too, and Daniil broke him and went up, served for the match, and Djokovic broke back and won it in a tiebreak. So he put all that energy, knowing that the next day he's going to have to play Taylor Fritz in the semifinals in a much more meaningful match, and then come out and follow that with a final against Ruud. So he was asked, Gill, why did you, basically he was asked why he tried so hard. He says, because Medvedev is one of my most important rivals, which I thought was a great compliment that he was paying Daniil, and shows you that he feels like each time he plays him, he has to treat it really seriously. He's got to treat it, in his mind, probably as seriously as playing Carlos. So I think that's one of the reasons he's bringing out his best most of the time when he plays him. Wasn't true in Dubai. He didn't play very well there. You know, that match, he'd beaten him in Adelaide, remember, at the start of this year as well, following up on Turin. Remember, then he had one kind of sloppy match against him, but I don't think that meant much. I don't think he was terribly keyed up for that match, back in the winter. But when he's really ready mentally, he's just slightly better. And I think Daniil knows that. And Daniil's comment, Gill, was fascinating when he went into that whole thing about you beaten him the last time. When he's lost to you, he's a different man. He's different, and meaning that he knew that Novak would be thinking about the 21 Open. Never mind the recent matches. The 21 Open would be in Novak's mind the most recent match, and he was going to avenge it. And then Daniil even mentioned Novak striking back at Carlos to beat Carlos after Carlos beat him at Wimbledon by beating Carlos in Cincinnati. Novak did in that epic. So I thought that was really interesting, that coming into the final, that would be Medvedev's thinking. It wasn't totally negative, because he just said he himself had to lift his game. He had to play that 10 times better. But he certainly knew there was no way Novak was turning in a performance like he did at the 21 Open. Bottom line is, I do think it shows you how much Novak definitely has immense respect for Medvedev as a hard court player, and feels like he's got it, which is why he also, and for Medvedev's physical durability, which is why Novak was so deeply determined to win that second set. And it's one of his great displays of willpower to get through a 1 hour, 44-minute set with so many marathon 3-4 deuce games. And what was interesting, just a quick comment about that second set, Gil, because everybody, obviously the first and third sets were pretty straightforward, as Medvedev admitted himself after the match. There wasn't much to those. One break early for Novak, a love break in the second game of the match, and that really won in the first set, no break points against him. And then in the third, he got the break for 3-1, lost his serve, but got it right back and ran out the match from there. But in that second set, what I think people forget too easily, Gil, and I know you don't, is that in the first half of the set, Novak had 3 love games on serve. He was holding so easy. And every time Daniil served, it's either he had one 15-30 game, a couple of tough deuce games, and then finally a 3-all. Novak has a break point that Daniil did a great job to save with a big serve that set up a swing volley winner. So I think when Novak finally started to run into the troubles of 3-4, he was feeling the effects of been knocking on the door to get the break, meantime holding his own serve with ease. And now suddenly, he was in a bit of a jam. But I think people forget it because Novak himself said afterwards, I thought he maybe outplayed me in the second set. He was kind of being kind of modest, I thought, because the first half of the set, he was really more in control, and Daniil was still having trouble holding. But Daniil competed well, and then what's great about that is, as spectators, we got to see something that was sort of pulsating and fascinating in the latter stages, to watch this tug of war in the second half of the set when Daniil sensed his chance and Novak fended him off. And then, of course, the tiebreak, I thought to come back from 3-1 and go up 4-3 and Daniil to play 2 really good points. Novak missed a forehand down the line on one, but then that next point, which was a terrific struggle, and Novak tried that little angled backhand drop, and Daniil got to it, redropped, and wins the point. So suddenly, for Novak, after all that, to be serving 4-5 in the breaker and to play a point like he did at 4-5, where the last 6 shots he hit were all cross-court backhands, one better than the next, right? A little harder, a little more angle, a little more on it, until finally he forces the error. And then he follows with a serve volley point where Daniil missed that forehand return down the line, and then Daniil makes an error at 5-6. But I thought those 2 clutch points from Djokovic from 4-5 were terrific. And again, the 5-all point, he didn't back off. Would have been a time you might think, Gil, that he says, I'm not going to serve and volley here. This is a big point. I'm just not going to do it. But he didn't hesitate. He was right in behind. And as usual, the placement on the serve was perfect. So I just thought it was a great set to watch. And you could see it had to be, it just had to be so demoralizing for Medvedev to give that much effort and play that well, and could have sort of sensed that he was going to be at 1 set all and not get rewarded for his hard efforts.
Yeah, the path to victory for Medvedev was always going to be just to take it out of Novak's legs and make it really, really physical. I think the respect that Djokovic has for Medvedev is most evident in the fact that he knows he can't play his normal game against Daniil, because Daniil can actually beat him if he does that, if he gets comfortable. But I think Novak learned that years ago, that this is a different kind of opponent who can actually beat me from the back of the court, which basically nobody else can. So as a result, I need to actually make an effort to be more offensive, to do some point shortening, to use my weapons to kind of keep it from becoming a grind fest. So, but I think ever since Djokovic has really committed to that style, he has usually come out on top in the head-to-head.
No, I agree. And as we said at the outset, it'd be interesting to see if he now tries to do some of this against other players and attack more. But the bottom line, he's found the right form that shows you the flexibility as a player, and that, that he, for him to be able to do that. I mean, Daniil could never have dreamed of trying to play that way against Novak himself. And I have to say, I was surprised. I have the utmost respect for Brad Gilbert, but I really was surprised. A short time before you and I came on just now, I was looking at the pre-match show on ESPN, and Brad was doing his
tail of the tape.
Yeah, tail of the tape, right, and the checks and everything. And he was putting Daniil down even with Novak for the volley, which shocked me, because I don't think Daniil volleys nearly as well as Novak.
Yeah. And Brad said it's because of the overhead, and also the other thing, we won't focus on this. They got to give more 1 checks for that. They never give 1 check. Like Medvedev volley should be 1 check, not even 2. And then Novak should probably be 3. But if you're going to say, okay, the overhead, so we give him 2, at least you have to make it so Novak is above Medvedev. I agree with you.
Yeah. Hey, listen, don't get me wrong, because Gilbert is so astute.
Yes.
What a magnificent job he's done with Coco. But that one particular, and usually I find myself in complete accord with every one of those checks, but not that one. And I think it showed. And you're right. Okay, so he says the overhead. It's true that Daniel's very hard to lob, and his overhead is pretty reliable. But the volley itself, not nearly as sound. And
Yep.
you know, and that's what actually got Medvedev into trouble a bit against Carlos, is that when he lost his serve the one time in the third set, there were a couple of volleys that he really didn't do enough with that showed some vulnerability for him up there. You know, if he's got a really easy volley, sure, he can put that away, but he might not have lost his serve there, and maybe that match wouldn't have even gone 4 sets. So it's interesting. But look, I will say this, Gil, when it comes to Medvedev, that was one of the most important wins he's had in a long time over Alcaraz in the semis. And now I think that'll help him for the rest of this year and next year, because things had not, you know, he'd had such a good early season, as we know, that great stretch, you know, carried him through the final Indian Wells, winning Miami, winning all those tournaments before that. He was so hot, and then he won Rome. And then since Rome, things had not gone that well, despite his semifinal appearance at Wimbledon, because the semifinal appearance at Wimbledon was somewhat ruined by being obliterated by Carlos in the semis. He just never close there. So I feel like this was a really important win, because Carlos had started to get into his head by beating him so badly in both California and Wimbledon. So now I suspect he'll have a pretty good end to the year, and most likely will end the year at 3 in the world, and he'll come into next year with feeling pretty good about himself. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. Shockingly, that was his first top 10 win at a major. The Rublev win was his first top 10 win at a major since beating Tsitsipas in the semis in Australia in 2022. And 2022, that AO and losing to Nadal was kind of the marker where you put, okay, Medvedev had a bit of a downturn since then. So that was a massive, massive win. And I do want to talk about it now, actually. You know, just reversing what was, you know, it wasn't a large accumulation of losses to Alcaraz. It was only 2, but it was obviously the fashion, the one-sidedness of both of those matches that made it so that coming into the match, I think Alcaraz felt like he was supposed to win. Medvedev felt like, okay, I'm probably not supposed to win here, given how the last 2 went. But Daniil got it done. Let's talk about Alcaraz. What did you learn about Carlitos, not only in that match, but also through the hardcourt season, where, you know, he did make the final in Cincinnati, but he comes out empty-handed in the titles category for this North American hardcourt season?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let's start off with Canada. He loses that hard-fought match with Tommy Paul. Okay, that's his first tournament. He had played that little, what was it, the Hopman Cup after the Wimbledon, but that's nothing. I mean, first hardcourt tournament, and he loses to Tommy. Okay, Tommy beat him last summer too. And then, you know, he avenges the loss to Tommy in Cincinnati, but everybody was pushing him to the brink, including Hurkacz in the semis. And every match was tough. In fact, I think he played much better against Novak than he did against any of the other guys in Cincinnati. Fantastic match. And in a way that could have carried him into the Open with some confidence. But then, even though he had pretty good scores, Gil, and he lost that set to Dan Evans, and, you know, Lloyd Harris, the Harris match, there were some tough moments there. Then he eventually beats Zverev in the quarters and straight after the Zverev win over Sinner. But somehow I wasn't convinced. I never felt like his forehand looked streaky to me the whole tournament. I thought some of the wins were misleading. The draw was good. I never was convinced about him, even though I was convinced he was going to lose to Medvedev, because I'd seen those other 2 matches, and I thought he was so much in Daniel's head that he was just that was going to win him the match psychologically. I didn't think Daniel was going to lift it that high, because, as you said, he beat Rublev for that first top 10 win. He was down in every set, 3-11 in the first set, 3-1 in the second set, 4-2 in the third. And Rublev, it just seems psyched out against him to me, to not be able to take advantage of one of those opportunities. Good for Daniel to get it done in straight, but he also had to come back against De Minaur. That was pretty good, considering De Minaur had beaten him the last 2 times. But I just felt like, to get back to Carlos, I just felt like it was a bit misleading, the wins that he was having, that he still wasn't quite there. He was enjoying himself. He was playing okay. A lot of people thought he played really well against Zverev. I thought Zverev wasted the first set opportunity, a couple of break points at 3-all. Zverev in the first half of the first set was looking terrific. And I felt like if Zverev could have built a lead, he could have threatened. And then it all went away for Sasha because he got broken in the following game and then got blitzed in the second. And it wasn't until the third that he really got sort of halfway got back into it. So I just thought all of these matches were kind of creating a false impression. And I don't want to, don't get me wrong, I don't want to knock Carlos. He's such a great player and his attitude is so good and he always wants to learn. But when it comes to, you asked about the hardcourt swing and you look at it in its entirety, and the highlight was actually the match with Novak, which could have gone their way and was one of the, I don't know if I'll ever see a better best of 3-set match. So and also the way he fought back in the third after Novak had saved match point in the second, for Carlos to wipe away those match points at 3-5 and 4-5 in the third was remarkable. And but no, overall, I don't think he can be thrilled with not winning a title out of the three. One wouldn't have expected it given how many tournaments he's won this year, and he wins Wimbledon, and he's so good on all surfaces, and he's so committed to every match he plays. It's not that you never feel like he's treating the other tournaments lightly. Maybe sometimes he almost cares a little too much. But it'll be interesting to me to see how he performs in the fall. I mean, now that Novak has created a big lead in the race for number one, how important is it to him to try to get back there or just to start winning a few more titles between now and the end of the year and maybe try to peak for the year-end championships? What do you expect from him?
I'm not sure. Now, I think I really like the description, streakiness on the forehand. That stood out to me throughout the entire summer. And I was not noticing that on the clay or on the grass, where it just seemed like his forehand was solidly one of the, a reliable weapon and a enormously damaging weapon at that. And when he has that under his belt, plus the volleys, plus the movement, now you have, I think, the entire game clicking. But look, the forehand is a shot. You're going to be hitting hundreds of forehands every single match. And it needs to be something that is not going to spray and that is going to be under control. And it wasn't that for him. I think that was a big issue. He lost his tactics, I believe, against Daniil. The way he was playing him the last two times, much more patient, much more off pace than he usually plays. And I thought, wow, what a great adjustment, way to kind of understand who you're playing and to change your game accordingly. But in this match, I didn't see that at all. I thought he was playing very fast with a lot of pace through the middle of the court, which Medvedev loves. And then obviously—
And then in turn, did you think in turn that Daniil, then he turned things around very nicely from his end of the court, and he was very aggressive of his forehand. He served much better than he did against Carlos in the previous two matches. So it was an interesting combination. I agree with you. Carlos didn't play it the same way. And for some reason, Ferrero seemed to want him to go in a lot. Obviously, he won. His numbers were very good coming forward, but still, he lost some very big points up there too. And then once again, there's no doubt the forehand at times let him down. Yeah, no doubt.
And the serve. So I think the two things, Medvedev was far more solid from the back of the court. Not that he was defensive, but he was much more reliable off the ground. And his first serve was getting him free points. Alcaraz, he was getting serve and volley points, but he wasn't getting the same kind of cheap points that Medvedev was getting, which is to be expected. But I also think from a return standpoint, Alcaraz was getting returns back in play with ease at Wimbledon. And, just 2 months later, that was certainly not the case. So it was interesting.
I think that Medvedev, that's an important point. I think Medvedev was more accurate, more deadly accurate with his first serve in this match. He really had the wide serve in the ad court working, was closing out a lot of games with that. I think that was a factor. Maybe Carlos just didn't return as well. But here's what amazes me about that match. As you know, Carlos is a ferocious competitor. It's very hard to discourage him. It's one of his great qualities, because even when Daniil was trying to serve out the match and getting nervous and double faulting on match point, going for a 126, it was insane what he tried to. But Carlos seems to always believe he can pull it out, which is why why he was able to save all those 4 match points against Novak in Cincinnati. He just seems to have that enduring belief. But what happened here was very strange to me. First set, he had an early break opportunity. Daniel's first 2 service games were really a struggle, and then he finally settled in. And they go to the tiebreak. Carlos is held easily all the way through the set. And then they go to 3-all when Daniel had double faulted to make it 3-all and gave away the mini break. And then Carlos doesn't win another point. And he later said, in essence, that he'd had brain cramps. He just kind of lost his mind because the second set was a 6-1 set. That's so unlike Carlos to not have dug in early in the second, kept it close, and fought for the second as if the second set was critical to the outcome of the match. In other words, you've lost a tiebreaker. He marginally outplayed you in the first set, but that was really un-Alcaraz-like to me, to see that second set slip away. Daniel played very well, all credit to him, but not a good effort from Alcaraz, certainly mentally very, very uncharacteristic of him.
100%. You have to know in a best of 5 set match when you just lost the first set. The first couple games of that second set is going to be so important. And you need to not have a carryover effect from the first. And it did feel like there was that for Alcaraz. And I think part of it was actually the head-to-head. It was almost like he was stunned that Medvedev had seemingly turned the tables on him. And I think a little bit of panic set in. So I think the great thing, though, about Alcaraz is he's so reflective and he's such a good learner that I think this experience of dominating a guy twice and then losing to him, I think he's going to look inward and think about his psychology coming into that third match and think about maybe how he could come in if that situation arises again, how he might take the court with a different mindset.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And it's what you're saying is kind of affirmed by what Alcaraz said about, he didn't have the maturity he needed. I like the fact that he's willing to be so self-critical. It's not negative even. It's like, well, I've got to learn. I'm going to learn. I like that. And he didn't say, and he doesn't come up with 1,000 alibis. There's none of that. And that's terrific. My concern, I have to say, you were so young when Juan Carlos Ferrero was in his prime, Gil. I don't want to tell the listeners how young you were then, but think about it. He plays Andy Roddick 20 years ago in the U.S. Open final, and he won a French in that period, and actually got to #1 in the world. And he was known as quiet and industrious, and you listen to his press conference, and he was kind of soft-spoken and easygoing. Boy, he seems like a different guy to me as a coach, and I'm not saying he hasn't done a first-rate job with Carlos, but one thing I would disagree with is the amount of advice. It's almost a little excessive. He's shouting to him, and you're allowed to do it. It's not cheating. I don't mean that. I just mean sometimes maybe he's better to back off a bit and let Carlos cool off and let Carlos figure out a few things. But it seems like their formula now, or their routine, is that Carlos is looking at him almost every point. And and it's different from, say, Novak with his camp, where a lot of times he's just venting, or he wants to know like I asked Ivanisevic in the press conference. I asked Goran about Novak looking to him, and they're talking. There was all this stuff about the toss, and you'd see Ivanisevic raise his arm to Novak, and what he told me was that it was tossing too far forward. That's what was going on, and he would tell him that. And okay, so that's something particular. And then sometimes Novak is just angry and he lets it loose. But it's different with Carlos. This is like constant tactical advice on how to play the next point. I don't think that's good for him. And I think he's a very smart player in his way. Yes, he can be a little rash at times, a little too adventuresome, go for too much at times, but let him play a bit and then be more selective with your advice. That's how I think that would be better for Ferrero and for Alcaraz. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure. I haven't landed on one side or the other on this one, because in one respect, it's and yes, it's very unconventional for tennis. I was talking to Jose Higueras, actually, who's Spanish, and he said this is a more common coaching style in Spain, that Spanish coaches are a little bit more hands-on point to point. So, but I'm trying to imagine myself in Alcaraz's shoes as a player. And I guess the benefit of it, there's a downside and an upside. The upside is you can clear your brain and focus on execution. You can take the baseline when Ferrero tells you where to serve. Well, you're like a pitcher in baseball where the catcher calls the signals, and you can just clear your mind and focus on execution. And I maybe there's a benefit to that, right? Just, okay, wide serve, boom, and you do it. Alcaraz, crucially, is never resentful when the tactic doesn't work. He never says, why did you tell me to do that? Which most coaches, when you ask most coaches about, oh, would you ever do what Ferrero does? They'd say, no, my player would not handle that well, because whenever it wouldn't work, they'd blame me. That'd be a disaster. So the good thing is Alcaraz doesn't do that. Now, I also see what you're saying when it comes to just feeling out the match and trying to become confident in your decisions on the court and what you're doing. Wouldn't you kind of increase the sensation of feeling like you're on top of the proceedings when you are the one on the court making all the decisions?
Yeah,
it's a fascinating conversation.
And it is fascinating, and you wonder whether it's something they will discuss. The two of them will discuss going forward, and whether Ferrero would be willing to listen to Carlos's, take his input on that, and consider what he wants. It just hit me this Open, because it's just, I've been seeing it leading up to the Open, but I just feel like it's gotten to that point, and I put myself in Carlos's shoes, and I'm saying, do I really want to get that much information, point in and point out? But you make a good point, and that's interesting about what Higueras had to say about it. That explains a few things to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who don't know, Jose Higueras, former coach of Jim Courier, and it was the head development at the USTA. So he developed Tiafoe and Paul and Fritz and that generation of Americans. Steve, let's you know what, year-end number one race, Novak, because you asked me how do you think Alcaraz will do this fall, and I got to say I don't know, because the level of focus, I think, is a big thing with Alcaraz, and just how committed he is to the discipline aspect of everything. And I know there's some fatigue setting in, and I just think there might be more matches this fall where Alcaraz comes out and he does play a little bit fast and loose. I don't know. It's a sense that I have that maybe that could happen. But he did say,
Gill, just let me sorry for interrupting. So you basically, you see him maybe letting some matches slip away because of that. What is your thought on that?
I think when he's not completely locked in right now, like one example would be when he was up 5-2 in the third set against Hurkacz. And he just got a little bit, I don't know if it's boredom, but he went into autopilot mode.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen when Alcaraz isn't laser focused is he's still very, very aggressive, but he's less measured in his implementation of that, and he can just beat himself. So, then he blew that lead to Hurkacz, then he locked back in. Or how about an example in the Zverev match? His worst set was the third set, level-wise. Yeah. And what happened? Did he get bored because he was up 2-0? I think in a way he kind of does. So with no majors, the fall season where everyone's a little bit tired, everyone's a little bit drained, I just don't know how well Alcaraz will handle that. He didn't handle it very well last year. So that's kind of my read on it. Who do you think will be year-end number one? Because right now Novak is 770 points ahead.
Yeah, no, you're talking about the live race. Yeah, I think it's gonna be very close. I don't know. I don't think Novak is gonna want to kill himself to achieve it. It would be an 8th year, so it's something he would love to have, along with getting to 400 weeks. I would think concluding 8 years at number one in the world would be something very meaningful to him if he could do it. But he doesn't want to do it to the detriment of going back and being fresh for the Australian Open and trying to win an 11th there. So that's going to be interesting too. How much is he going to want to play? How much is he going to need to do? Because obviously the tricky part is at the very end when all those points are protected, trying to protect all those points in Turin, which he won without losing a match. So I think he'll feel his way through it. He'll gauge what he needs to do, and like you, I'm not sure what to expect from Carlos, except that I think there's a hunger even beyond the number one to win tournaments.
Yeah.
And it gets back to what we were talking about. He's got to be a bit surprised at having 3 cracks post Wimbledon on hard courts. He didn't come away with the title. And then to have the disappointment of not even getting to play Novak in New York as everybody was anticipating, and have it be a loss to Daniel. All that combined, I think he is going to want to get back on track. But I hope, my concern is, I saw that the leg it seemed like it was precautionary, but the leg was taped up again under the shorts. I hope we don't see a repeat of last year in the sense of getting hurt again.
Yep.
When he played Runa indoors in Paris, which kept him out of the year-end championships. He's been able to sort of muddle through, I don't even want to say muddle, to get through this recent stretch without any injuries that are going to keep him out of commission. But he doesn't want to have a repeat of that last year, because it also carried over into this year. And the next thing you know, he's out of the Australian Open too. So to have missed both Turin last year and the Australian Open at the start of this year, and then have a few problems thereafter, he doesn't need that again. So that's something that he has to consider too, that he shouldn't overplay either.
Yeah, absolutely. He pulled out a Davis Cup. Good decision. I don't know why he played Hopman Cup after Wimbledon. That seemed unnecessary, and it may have hindered his hardcourt preparation. Who knows? So yeah, managing the schedule has been, at times I think a strength for Alcaraz, and at times there have been some puzzling decisions. It's been kind of a mixed bag. Ben Shelton is the surprise of the event, making the semifinals unseeded. What a strange year he's had. Not much between the Australian Open and the US Open, but he's 20 years old. He's got a major quarterfinal. He's got a major semifinal. He's pretty much fresh out of college, and oftentimes we see a much longer period of adjustment for players who come from college, especially when they leave early at 20 years old. How good is Ben Shelton right now, and how do you see him as a prospect?
I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. I mean, listen, it was a very impressive run. To beat the 2 Americans, I mean, Tommy Paul and Tiafoe, I mean, that says a lot about him, because he'd lost to Tommy Paul in Australia, and Tiafoe had been in the semis last year, and I think went out there fully expecting to be back in the semis again. And he managed to fend him off hit that incredible forehand return winner, set point down in the 3rd set tiebreak, and then won the match in 4. And listen, it was very impressive, and he did a nice job once Novak got a bit tight late in the 3rd set of their semifinal of making him work hard to finish him off. He showed his best stuff in the latter stages after being down 2-0 and 4-2 in the 3rd to get into a tiebreak. He's got a lot of gifts. The one thing I'll say, that I guess the thing that impressed me the most in the Djokovic match, toward the end especially, was how good his backhand was. We see him flail, just teeing off of his forehand, sometimes just getting carried away with too much power, unnecessary, tone it down a bit. But the backhand looks to me like a pretty solid shot. And it was in the latter stages. And sometimes he was beating Novak in the cross-court exchanges, Novak's forehand to his backhand. That was impressive to me. And he does a lot of variety on the serve, because he doesn't just hit the 143s and the 149s. He's got that great wide slice in the ad court using his leftiness. And he can do a lot of things with that serve. And he's very inventive. And as he said, coming to the Djokovic match, players see things from him they don't see from anybody else. So all told, I think it was a big step. But this time, Gil, I guess to answer your question, this time I want to see some follow-up. It wasn't a good run, as you said. Post-Australia to the Open was not good, and he was struggling to win matches. So I hope that this time we'll see we'll see Ben dig in, and show some consistency in the fall, and put together a couple more good tournaments that can prove to everybody that he really belongs in the top 20. That will set the stage for a really good campaign next year. It's going to tell us a lot what he does in these next 3 or 4 tournaments, because I think I'd like to see some good results from him. I'd like to see some good wins from him in that stretch.
That would be great to see from Shelton. But even watching him at the US Open, where he was playing his best tennis, I can't escape the feeling that he is, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years away from his best tennis. Just the way that I think the spot serving can improve, the decision making can improve. He's already made some technical improvements on his forehand and his backhand, but the fact that he's still altering his technique off the ground kind of tells you something about where he is at. So, the touch and the volleys will get better. So much raw capability, so much athleticism, a serve that I think will be one of the best, if not the best in the game at some point.
Yeah.
But I think it's 3, 4 years away in the big picture. So long term, I have nothing but positive to say about Ben. Short term, I don't know if it's going to happen quickly, even though he's had these 2 great runs at the majors.
That's interesting. I'll tell you what, Gil, I'm a little more optimistic than that. I'm hoping that it's more like 2 years off.
Sure.
That at 22, and I may be wrong. Listen, you could well be right. It may be a longer process. I'm slightly more optimistic that by 2025, we're starting to see him play, say, solid top 10 tennis, and that everything is coming together. And you mentioned the spot serving. That's interesting because Djokovic seemed to be able to pick. It didn't matter whether he came in 143 down the tee or 115 wide or what he tried to do in terms of varying the pace and the spin. Djokovic seemed to be able to read it almost every time.
The toss gives it away. He doesn't have a ball toss that's well disguised like Sampras and Federer.
Oh yeah, true. And even frankly, even like Kyrgios, I think Kyrgios can be very hard to read.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. And his father should be very helpful to him. But obviously this was a bigger boost than he could ever expected to have gotten out of the last major of the season, given what had happened post Australia all the way up to New York. So when I say I want to see some backup in the fall, I'm not expecting to see him, get to a bunch of finals, but I want to see some quarters and some wins and some good showings and good performances in defeat between now and the end of the year, so that can carry him into next year and he can make more strides then. He is fascinating, but let's face it, that athleticism that you mentioned and this shot making explosiveness, it's a little unnerving to play him.
Oh yeah.
I have to say though, in turn, I was a bit disappointed in the performances of Tommy Paul and Tiafoe, particularly Tommy Paul. I thought Tommy Paul, we talked about him and Carlos, and the kind of tennis he was playing over the summer was really first rate. And Tommy, with that solid foundation in his game, I thought he was the guy that should have been facing Novak in the semifinals, in my view. And it didn't happen for him. I'm sorry about that because I think he's worked hard and, he very well coached by Brad Stein and good guy. And I think somehow, I don't think he did himself full justice against Ben Shelton. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, didn't see the match, but Tommy was my pick to make the semis. I was also expecting him to get through that match. The other thing with Ben, by the way, is he's just not afraid of the moment. He eats it up. The last thing I want to ask you on Shelton is what do you make of the way he carries himself around the court? It's very college tennis. In college tennis, it's very, very, very typical for players to walk around with a confident swagger, to make remarks to their teammates and their coaches about that may come across as cocky, or to celebrate a lot when you win the point. Very typical in that sphere. But in pro tennis, Ben stands out as somebody who's bringing much more energy and exaltations to the court.
It's well described. I think, as a fan, I don't make much of a judgment as a reporter. Let's put it that way. But I think the other players, I think even Tommy Paul, by the way, and I had the impression that perhaps even Tiafoe, who was very subdued, that they're not thrilled with it either, even though they might like him off the court and apparently do like him off the court. So I guess he's going to learn. I think he'll learn to tone some of that down and realize that this is a different, you're not in college tennis anymore. The rules are a bit different. The expectations, how you carry yourself on the court, it's not the same. So I think that that's going to be interesting to watch. And then obviously something happened with him in the Novak match, because, you know, that they had a very icy handshake, and you could tell that Novak was not thrilled with some of the things he saw. And that's totally unlike him. Most of the guys, he's hugging them, win or lose, and there's a warmth that when it's over, it's kind of like, hey, that was a battle. That was terrific. It wasn't that way with the two of them, and they each downplayed it in their press conferences. But obviously, there were clearly a few things that Djokovic found offensive, and I believe that was also true. I'm convinced it was true with Tommy Paul and Tiafoe as well. So something that Ben probably needs to think about, and his father as well, about changing some of his ways. Doesn't mean he can't be exuberant out there, but he can be a little. He can change the tone of it a bit.
Very well said. Or maybe they'll look at it and they'll say, we're just going to keep doing it, and how other people feel about it, be damned. Who knows? But yeah, I do think that it's going to be interesting to see if a 23-year-old Ben Shelton is the same as the 20-year-old Ben Shelton that we're watching now. Steve, always so much joy that I get out of recapping these majors with you. It's another year in the books. And I cannot thank you enough for always coming on early in the week after majors and doing this with me.
You know your stuff so well, and you steer these discussions. It's always a joy for me. So believe me, I'm delighted to come on, and I look forward to post-Australia.
All right, until next year.